The night my own son stood up in a crowded restaurant and laughed while calling me a loser, I didn't raise my voice or defend myself. I folded my napkin, stood quietly, and walked out into the cold. He thought it ended there. He had no idea that my silence was the first step, and that within days, the life he bragged about would start collapsing piece by piece. Before I tell you how that unfolded, do something for me. Stay with this story, share where you're listening from, and follow along so voices like mine don't disappear unheard. My name is Harold Whitman, and I was 72 years old when I finally learned that silence has weight. Some silences heal, some silences protect, and some silences are sharpened into tools. That night, I chose the third. The restaurant was called Levant, a glass and gold monument to excess tucked into the wealthiest district of Northbridge City. Everything in it glittered, polished marble floors, crystal fixtures hanging like frozen fireworks, servers gliding as if trained and never disturbed the illusion. This place wasn't chosen for comfort. It was chosen to impress. And that told me everything I needed to know. My ex-wife, Elaine, sat across from me, her posture stiff, her smile rehearsed. Years ago, she had been practical, grounded, the kind of woman who cared more about function than flash. 5 years married to Victor Hale, her new husband, had replaced that woman with someone who checked labels before checking people. Victor sat beside her, relaxed, smug, his tailored jacket draped effortlessly over his chair like he owned the room. And then there was my son, Caleb. Caleb leaned back in his seat, swirling wine he hadn't paid for, wearing confidence like it had been stitched into his suit. Beside him sat his wife, Marissa, her eyes scanning me not with curiosity, but with quiet judgment, measuring, comparing, subtracting. Caleb was talking loudly, performing more than conversing. The expansion's insane right now, he said, voice carrying just far enough for nearby tables to hear. New investors, new contracts. Honestly, I'm thinking it's time to upgrade the car again. Marissa laughed softly. You deserve it. Success should look like success. I took a sip of water and said nothing. I already knew where the money came from. I always had. Elaine glanced at me. Isn't he impressive, Harold? She asked, though her tone made it clear she wasn't asking. Victor smiled indulgently. Ambition like that doesn't come from nowhere, he said, though some people settle for stability instead of building something real. Caleb nodded eagerly. Exactly. I keep telling Dad, playing it safe doesn't get you anywhere. You have to think bigger. I chewed my food slowly. The steak was expensive, cooked perfectly, and tasted like ash. They talked about penthouse views, international trips, watches that cost more than the first car I ever owned. Each word was a subtle push, a test to see how much I'd shrink. I didn't. When dessert arrived, some towering confection meant more for photographs than eating. Victor waved for the check. My treat, he said smoothly, glancing at me. A performance. A reminder. That's when Caleb stood. His chair scraped loudly, drawing eyes from nearby tables. He gestured broadly, first toward Victor, then toward me. That, he said, smiling, is the difference. Some people win. Some people just exist. Dad, you spent your life playing small. Face it, you're a loser. The word echoed louder than he realized. Elaine looked down at her plate. Victor smirked. Marissa nodded as if a truth had been spoken. I looked at my son, really looked at him. For half a second, I saw the boy who once rode on my shoulders at job sites, wearing a plastic helmet too big for his head. Then it vanished. I didn't argue. I placed my napkin beside the plate, stood, and walked away. The door closed behind me, sealing them inside their laughter. Outside, the air was cold and sharp. I walked home through streets I helped design decades earlier, past buildings I had worked on with my own hands. My house stood quietly beneath an old maple tree, brick, solid, unremarkable to anyone who mistook flash for worth. Inside, I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't pour a drink. I went straight to my study. Blueprints lined the walls, bridges, offices, infrastructure meant to last longer than applause. On my desk sat an old photograph. Caleb at 5 years old, grinning on my shoulders. I sat down, powered on my computer, and opened a folder I hadn't touched in years. Everything was still there. That night, the sacrifices ended, and by Monday morning, the lesson would begin. I slept very little that night, not because I was restless, but because my mind had finally gone quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a decision has been made, and there is nothing left to debate. When morning light filtered the blinds of my study, it didn't feel like a new day. It felt like the continuation of a plan already in motion. I brewed my coffee the way I always had. Strong, black, no sugar. Routine matters when everything else is shifting. I carried the mug into my study and sat at the desk where most of my life's real work had been done. Not the loud work people applauded, but the quiet work that held things together. I opened my laptop again. The folders were still there, exactly as I'd left them the night before. Decades of foresight hidden behind bland names and boring structures. Companies within companies. Trusts inside trusts. Legal frameworks designed not for greed, but for control and protection. I'd built them after the divorce, when I realized something painful but necessary. Love without boundaries invites exploitation. Back then, Caleb had still been young, ambitious, impatient, convinced the world owed him something simply because he wanted it badly enough. When he first came to me with his idea, some tech platform full of buzzwords and half-baked projections, I'd seen two things clearly. One, the idea wasn't ready. Two, he wasn't ready either. But I also saw the hunger in his eyes. And like many fathers, I confused hunger with readiness. I hadn't handed him money directly. That would have ruined him faster. Instead, I built a system, a stage. I let him believe investors had discovered him. Let him believe success had come because of his brilliance alone. I told myself I was helping him build confidence. What I was really doing was building scaffolding and forgetting to take it down. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed for the first time. Caleb. I let it ring. Then Elaine. I let it ring too. Silence isn't avoidance when it's intentional. It's a message. I closed the laptop and went for a walk through the neighborhood. People waved. A few stopped to talk about mundane things. Weather, construction down the street, a new cafe opening soon. They knew me as the quiet engineer who'd lived here forever. Not impressive. Not flashy. Reliable. Loser, my son had called me. The word rolled through my mind again. But it didn't sting anymore. Words lose power when you finally see the hand that threw them. By noon, I was in my lawyer's office. Margaret Klein had been my attorney for over 20 years. She was sharp, efficient, and immune to theatrics. Her office overlooked the river, sunlight bouncing off glass and steel structures I'd helped calculate decades earlier. She handed me a cup of coffee before I even sat down. "You don't usually ask for emergency meetings," she said. "That tells me this is serious." "It is," I replied calmly. "I'm activating the contingency." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "All of it?" "Yes." Margaret didn't argue. She never did when I was this certain. She simply opened her tablet and began scrolling through files we had prepared years ago but hoped would never be needed. "Let's start with a vehicle," she said. "That's the fastest lever." "The car goes first." I agreed. "It's symbolic." She nodded. "Tow order can be executed Monday morning. Clean. Legal. No notice required." "Good. Next." "The accounts," I said. "Freeze access. Not shut down. Just enough to remind him that money flows from somewhere." "And the residents?" I paused for half a second. Not hesitation. Calculation. "Wednesday," I said. "Give him time to feel each step." Margaret looked at me carefully. "This isn't punishment." "No," I said. "It's correction." She understood. By the time I left her office, the city looked different. Not smaller, clearer. Structures revealed their bones when you knew where to look. That afternoon, I received the first voicemail. Caleb's voice was sharp, annoyed. "Dad, what's your problem? Why aren't you answering?" That stunt at dinner was embarrassing. "Call me back." I deleted it. The second voicemail came an hour later. Less irritation. More confusion. "Okay, something weird's going on. There's an issue with the car lease. I'm sure it's nothing, but you need to call me." I deleted that too. That night, I cooked dinner for myself. Simple food. Ate slowly. Slept better than I had in years. Monday morning arrived without drama. Across the city, Caleb walked into his building's private garage. Coffee in hand. Phone already buzzing with messages he hadn't read yet. He pressed the key fob. Nothing happened. He frowned, pressed it again. Still nothing. Then he saw the tow truck. Bright yellow lights blinking like a warning he'd never learned to read. He shouted. He argued. He demanded. None of it mattered. By the time he realized the paperwork was real, the car was already halfway up the ramp. That was the first crack. I learned about an hour later, not from him, but from a short email Margaret forwarded to me. Vehicle repossession completed. No complications. I closed my laptop and went back to my book. That afternoon, Caleb called again. This time, he didn't sound angry. He sounded scared. Dad, please call me. Something's wrong. I didn't. Tuesday was quieter on my end, louder on his. The corporate cards declined first. Then the internal systems locked him out. Meetings canceled. Vendors stopped answering. His carefully curated image began to fracture in front of the very people he'd tried to impress. Richard, Victor's real name in this version of my life, called next. Not me. Caleb. I could imagine the panic in his voice when the consulting fees didn't arrive. The man who preached ambition folded quickly when the money stopped flowing. Wednesday arrived right on schedule. That evening, while I sat in my study reviewing an old bridge designed for a community project I volunteered on, my phone rang. Caleb. I answered. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then his voice broke. Dad, what did you do? I leaned back in my chair and looked at the blueprints on the wall. Lines. Measurements. Truth. I stopped pretending. I said calmly, and tomorrow we can talk. He exhaled sharply, as if the ground beneath him had finally given way. Where are you? At home, I replied. The real one. I hung up before he could say anything else. Because some lessons can't be explained over the phone. They have to be faced. Caleb arrived just before sunset. I knew it was him before the knock. There's a particular rhythm desperation carries. Too sharp to be polite. Too restrained to be rage. I didn't rush to the door. I finished the line I was reading, closed the book carefully, and set it aside. Control, I had learned, begins with pace. When I opened the door, he stood there breathing hard, hair disheveled, jacket wrinkled like he'd slept in it. This wasn't the man who performed at the restaurant. This was someone stripped of script and spotlight. He stepped inside without waiting to be invited. Say something, he demanded, voice already cracking. Just say something. I closed the door behind him and walked past, back toward the study. Follow me, I said. He did. The room looked exactly as it always had. Oak desk, shelves of engineering books, framed blueprints yellow with age. But Caleb looked at it differently now, as if the walls themselves were watching him. He stood while I sat. That was deliberate. You embarrass me, he said finally. You walked out like I didn't exist. And now everything's falling apart. My car, the accounts. People won't return my calls. I folded my hands on the desk. Sit down, Caleb. He hesitated, then did. You want to know why? I asked. Yes, he snapped. Because none of this makes sense. It makes perfect sense, I replied. You just never bothered to look under the surface. I reached for the laptop and turned the screen toward him. One folder sat open. Plain. Unremarkable. Do you remember your first funding meeting? I asked. He nodded slowly. Of course. It changed my life. It changed your lifestyle. I corrected. Not your life. I clicked. Documents filled the screen. Clean, organized, impossible to argue with. He leaned forward despite himself. What is this? He asked. Reality, I said. The part you skipped. I walked him through it methodically. No anger. No accusations. Just facts. The venture group he'd bragged about? A shell. The controlling interest in his company? Not his. The board he'd never met? Real and singular. Each page drained more color from his face. That's not possible, he whispered. I built that company. You ran it, I said. There's a difference. I moved to the next file. The car lease. You didn't buy it, I said calmly. You were allowed to use it. His jaw tightened. Then the residence. You never rented that place. I continued. You lived in a building I owned. The silence in the room thickened until it felt physical. He stood abruptly, pacing. You planned this. All of it. You set me up. No, I replied. I set you up to succeed. You set yourself up to forget where it came from. He stopped pacing and looked at me like a stranger. You took everything, he said. You ruined me. I shook my head. I took back what was mine. What ruins a man is believing he's entitled to things he didn't earn. He laughed bitterly. So this is about that word? About me calling you a loser? I met his eyes. That word revealed everything. He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. For the first time, he had no script. What do you want from me? He asked quietly. I closed the laptop. I want you to learn, I said. Not to apologize. Not to perform remorse. To learn what it feels like to stand without scaffolding. I stood. You'll leave here tonight with nothing but what you can carry. Tomorrow you find work. Real work. You pay your own rent. You answer to someone who doesn't care who your father is. His hand shook. And if I can't? Then you'll finally understand fear. I replied. The kind that builds character or breaks it. He looked around the room one last time, as if searching for a loophole hidden between the books. There wasn't one. When he left, the house felt lighter. Not emptier, lighter. Outside, the sun dipped below the trees, casting long shadows across the floor. I sat back down at my desk and stared at the closed door for a long time. This wasn't cruelty. It was consequence. And it was only the beginning. At the end of that week, Elaine called. I let it ring until silence reclaimed the room. Some conversations I'd learned don't deserve answers. The days after Caleb left my house were quieter than I expected. Not peaceful exactly. Peace implies relief, but steady, like the hum of a machine finally running at the speed it was designed for. I woke early, made my coffee, and sat on the back porch watching the sun rise over a neighborhood that had never once asked me to prove my worth. Silence has texture. I could feel it settling into the walls. Caleb, on the other hand, was learning what silence feels like when it isn't chosen. I didn't hear from him for 2 days. No calls. No messages. That told me more than any apology ever could. Pride doesn't collapse all at once. It fractures, slowly, painfully, each crack louder than the last. On the 3rd day, my phone buzzed while I was at the hardware store. Elaine. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. Her name felt heavier now, like a door I'd already locked, but someone kept rattling from the other side. I answered, not because I wanted to, but because I wanted to hear who she was when the performance fell apart. Harold, she said immediately, her voice strained, breathless. You need to stop this. I said nothing. You've gone too far, she continued. Caleb is spiraling. He's not sleeping. He's barely eating. This isn't teaching him a lesson. It's destroying him. I picked up a box of nails from the shelf, examined it, and put it back. You were there, I said calmly. At the restaurant. That was different, she snapped. He was emotional. You embarrassed him by walking out. I let the silence stretch until it made her uncomfortable. No, I said finally. He embarrassed himself by forgetting who built the floor he was standing on. She exhaled sharply. You always do this. You retreat into cold logic, like emotions don't exist. Emotions exist, I replied. Entitlement isn't one of them. She lowered her voice. Victor is furious. That almost made me smile. Of course he is, I said. The river stopped flowing. She didn't deny it. You can't just pull the rug out from under everyone, she said. You're punishing all of us. I'm correcting one man, I replied. The rest of you were comfortable beneficiaries. There was a pause. Then her tone shifted, softer, calculated. He needs help, Harold. At least give him something. A place to stay. Some support. I leaned against the counter. He has help, I said. Reality. I hung up before she could respond. That night, I dreamed of bridges. Not collapsing ones, unfinished ones. Half-built spans reaching toward nothing. When I woke, the image stayed with me. I'd spent my life designing structures meant to bear weight. Caleb had been standing on a bridge he'd never finished building, convinced it was solid because it hadn't fallen yet. Reality doesn't announce itself. It simply arrives. By Friday, the consequences were no longer abstract. Caleb's company, his company as he still called it, was no longer answering his emails. He wasn't fired, not officially. That would have been dramatic. Instead, he was sidelined, locked out, reduced to a title with no authority. He tried to bluff. He showed up at the office anyway, borrowed suit slightly rumpled, eyes tired. Employees avoided eye contact. Meetings were postponed. His assistant said nothing but offered him coffee he couldn't drink. When he tried to swipe his card for lunch, it declined. Again, he laughed it off the first time. The second time, his face burned. By the third, he left. Appearances crumble faster than finances. That evening, he went to the penthouse. Or tried to. The key still worked, but the silence inside was wrong. Too empty. Too final. Marissa was sitting at the kitchen island, arms folded, phone beside her like a discarded weapon. Her eyes were red. "What happened?" he asked. She laughed, a short, hollow sound. "That's what I've been asking all day." She told him about the credit card, about the whispers, about her friends suddenly being busy. "You told me this was stable," she said. "You told me this was yours." Caleb didn't answer. That's when the knock came. Firm, professional, not angry. A man in a gray suit stood in the hallway. When Caleb opened the door, clipboard, neutral expression, no drama. "Mr. Carter?" the man asked. Caleb nodded. "I'm here regarding your tenancy." The words didn't land at first. "Tenancy?" Caleb echoed. "There must be a mistake." "There isn't," the man said politely. "The lease is being terminated." Marissa stood behind him, hand over her mouth. "You have 72 hours to vacate." The paper felt heavier than it looked. When the door closed, Marissa screamed. Caleb stood there, staring at the city skyline through glass that no longer belonged to him. That was the night he finally broke. He didn't come to me. Not yet. He went to Victor. Victor answered with panic, not wisdom. His consulting contract was frozen. His accounts were under review. The man who had preached ambition suddenly had no advice to give. Winners disappear when there's nothing left to win. Saturday morning, I received one message. From Caleb. I don't know who I am without it. I read it once. Then I put the phone down. Because that question, the one he was finally asking, was a lesson. Sunday passed quietly. I attended church. Not for forgiveness. For clarity. The sermon was about foundations. I almost laughed at the timing. That evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across my living room, there was another knock at my door. This one was different, slower. He stood there with a duffel bag. No suit, no performance. Just a man stripped of his story. "Can we talk?" he asked. I stepped aside. The lesson wasn't finished yet, and neither was the story. Caleb didn't step inside right away. He stood on the threshold with that duffel bag hanging from his shoulder, as if crossing the line meant something irreversible. For years, this house had been background noise to him. Too quiet, too ordinary, too small for the version of himself he believed in. Now it looked different to him. Not smaller. Solid. I waited. Finally, he stepped in. I closed the door behind him and gestured toward the chair in the study. The same chair where, days earlier, I had dismantled a life he thought was permanent. He hesitated again, then sat. He didn't speak at first. That was new. "I don't want money," he said finally, voice low, careful. "I know that's not happening." I nodded once. "Good." "I don't want favors either," he added quickly, as if afraid I might interrupt. I need to understand how everything disappeared so fast." I leaned back. It didn't disappear fast. It was never anchored. He swallowed. "You built all of it, didn't you?" Yes. All of it? He asked again, quieter this time. Yes. The silence that followed wasn't angry. It was hollow. I thought I was strong, he said. Independent. I thought I had outgrown you. I folded my hands. You outpaced me socially, not structurally. He let out a short, humorless breath. I used to be embarrassed of you. I didn't react. You were always so calm, he continued. Everyone else's parents were loud. Flashy. You just worked. Came home. Read. Fix things. I nodded. That's called building. He stared at the floor. I mistook quiet for weakness. That's common, I said. It's also expensive. He looked up at me then, eyes red but focused. Why didn't you ever tell me? I answered honestly. Because if I told you, you would have leaned on it. And I wanted you to stand. But I didn't, he whispered. No, I agreed. You performed. He flinched. I don't say that to hurt you, I continued. I say it because pretending is easier than becoming. Until it isn't. He rubbed his face with both hands. Marissa left. I waited. She said she didn't sign up for instability, he said bitterly. Packed her things. Took what she could. Told me to call her when I had things figured out. That's not partnership, I said. He nodded. I know that now. He glanced around the study again, really seeing it this time. The blueprints, the books, the scars in the wood from projects long finished. You built things that lasted, he said quietly. I just consumed. That admission mattered. But it wasn't enough. Where are you staying tonight? I asked. He stiffened. I was hoping. No, I said gently. I'm not asking so you can stay here. He nodded slowly. A motel near the industrial park. Good, I said. You'll sleep better there than you think. He almost laughed. Almost. Tomorrow, I continued. You're going to get up early. You're going to put on whatever clean clothes you have. And you're going to look for work. His shoulders tensed. At my company? I shook my head. No, that chapter is closed. He swallowed. Then where? Anywhere that doesn't care who you are. I said, anywhere that pays you for effort, not identity. He sat with that. I don't know how to do that, he admitted. That's the point, I replied. He looked at me, really looked at me, not as a resource or obstacle, but as a man who had lived. Are you done with me? He asked. The question landed heavier than any insult ever had. No, I said carefully. I'm done carrying you. Tears finally came then. Quiet ones. No theatrics. Just release. I hated you for being satisfied, he whispered. I thought it meant you'd given up. I shook my head. It meant I'd figured out what was enough. He wiped his face. What if I fail? You will, I said, repeatedly. He looked startled. And you'll survive, I added. That's how men are made. We sat in silence for a long time after that. When he stood to leave, he paused at the door. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. But thank you for not lying to me anymore. I nodded. Don't thank me yet. Build something real first. He left without asking for anything else. The house returned to quiet. But it was a different kind now. Not tension. Not waiting. Completion. Over the next few weeks, I heard about Caleb only indirectly. Margaret mentioned that the company restructuring was complete. Victor's consulting firm dissolved quietly. Elaine sold her house. No calls. No confrontations. Just consequences moving outward like ripples. One afternoon, I received an envelope in the mail. Inside was a handwritten note. I got a job at a logistics warehouse. It's loud. It's exhausting. I'm renting a room. I pay every bill myself. I've never slept this hard in my life. I think this might be the first honest thing I've ever done. I folded the note and placed it in my desk drawer, not as a trophy, as a marker. That night, I sat on my porch and watched the sun go down, the sky fading from gold to deep blue. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just alignment. Some people call what I did cruel. They're wrong. Cruelty is letting someone believe they're strong while quietly holding them up forever. Truth, even when it hurts, gives people a chance. And for the first time in decades, I knew I had finally given my son that chance. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. Not because my life had suddenly become exciting, but because it had finally become honest. There were no urgent phone calls, no quiet financial rescues, no carefully worded excuses delivered on someone else's behalf. For the first time since Caleb had become an adult, his life was no longer tethered to mine, and that absence, unexpectedly, felt like relief. I spent my mornings the same way I always had. Coffee at dawn, a slow walk through the neighborhood, small projects that needed tending, a loose fence board here, a stubborn hinge there, the kind of work that asked for patience, not praise. I'd forgotten how grounding it was to do things that didn't impress anyone. Sometimes, while sanding an old chair or reviewing notes for a community project, my mind wandered to Caleb, not with worry, curiosity. I wondered how he was navigating a world that no longer been around him, how he handled being anonymous, how he responded when effort didn't guarantee applause. I didn't reach out. Growth needs room. 2 months passed before I heard his voice again. It was late afternoon when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me not to. "Hello," I said. There was a pause. Then, "It's me, Caleb." His voice sounded different. Not desperate, not defensive, just tired. "I didn't want to call," he said quickly. "I know you said not to lean on you." "You're not," I replied. "You're speaking." He exhaled. I wanted to tell you I quit." I waited. "The warehouse," he continued. "I lasted 6 weeks. My back's still killing me. But I didn't quit because it was hard. I quit because I realized I was hiding again, complaining instead of learning." I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "So I applied somewhere else," he said. "Construction supply yard. Entry level. Inventory. Loading trucks." I closed my eyes briefly. "And?" I asked. "They hired me," he said. "First day is Monday." There was something in his voice then, uncertainty mixed with pride. Real pride, not borrowed. "That's good," I said simply. "I didn't tell Mom," he added. "Or Victor." "Wise," I replied. He laughed softly. "I figured you'd say that." There was a pause. Then he cleared his throat. "I ran into someone from the old circle last week," he said. "They didn't recognize me at first. Asked what I was up to these days. And I told them the truth," he said. They laughed. Then they stopped laughing when they realized I wasn't joking. I smiled. "That took courage," I said. "Yeah," he replied quietly. "It did." We talked a little longer, about nothing important. The weather, his sore shoulders. How strange it felt to sleep, knowing tomorrow would be hard again. Before hanging up, he said, "I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know I'm still standing." That's all I ever wanted, I said. When the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time. This was the part no one talks about. The part after consequences, after collapse. The slow, unglamorous rebuilding that doesn't fit neatly into stories about pride or punishment. Weeks turned into months. Caleb didn't suddenly transform into a model son. He didn't apologize in some dramatic, tearful way. He didn't ask for forgiveness or try to rewrite the past. Instead, he did something far more meaningful. He stayed consistent. He worked. He learned. He failed without calling it injustice. He paid rent on a small room in a shared house. He showed up early. He kept his mouth shut and his hands busy. He sent me updates occasionally. Short ones. No emotion attached. Still sore. Still learning. Got certified on the forklift. First paycheck that actually felt earned. Each message felt like a brick laid carefully in a foundation that had never existed before. Elaine called once during that time. I let it ring. Victor tried next. I blocked the number. Some doors don't need explanations. One evening, nearly 6 months after the restaurant incident, Caleb showed up unannounced. Not desperate this time. Just present. He stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, wearing worn boots and a jacket that smelled faintly of oil and dust. He looked older, leaner, more grounded. "I was in the area," he said. "Thought I'd stop by." I stepped aside. We didn't go to the study. We sat at the kitchen table instead. Neutral ground. He brought nothing with him. No requests. No agenda. "I saved up," he said at one point. "Bought a used truck. Nothing fancy. Runs." I nodded. "Good." "I almost bragged about it," he admitted. Then I realized no one cares. And that felt strangely okay. "That's maturity," I said. He smiled faintly. "I ran into Victor last month," he said. "He tried to give me advice." And I asked. "I didn't listen," Caleb replied. For the first time. We sat quietly after that. "Do you still think I'm weak?" he asked suddenly. I met his eyes. "I think you were sheltered. There's a difference." He nodded slowly. "Do you think someday?" He trailed off. "I think someday," I said carefully, "you'll be a man who understands what is because he's felt what it's like to lose it." He swallowed. "I wish it hadn't taken all that." "So do I said. "But wishing doesn't build anything." He stood to leave soon after. At the door, he hesitated. "I don't know if I'll ever be who you wanted me to be." I considered that. "I don't want you to be me," I said. "I want you to be someone who doesn't need to pretend." He nodded, satisfied. After he left, I returned to my porch and sat as the sky darkened. The air was warm. Crickets began their nightly chorus. The world felt steady again. I thought about the word loser. How casually it had been thrown. How deeply it had cut. How completely it had lost its meaning. I had built bridges that carried thousands of people I'd never meet. Buildings that would stand long after I was gone. Systems invisible but essential. And in the end, my most difficult project hadn't been steel or concrete. It had been letting go, not of my son, but the illusion that love meant endless protection. Sometimes, love means stepping back and letting gravity do its work, and watching someone learn to stand. The real change didn't announce itself. It didn't arrive with apologies or grand gestures. It crept in quietly, disguised as routine. Nearly a year had passed since that night at the restaurant. 12 months since the word loser had been spoken like a verdict. 12 months since I'd chosen silence over spectacle. Life settled into something honest. Caleb didn't call often, but when he did, the calls weren't heavy anymore. They weren't loaded with expectation. They were simple updates, almost like progress reports a foreman might give. "Still at the yard," he said one evening. They moved me to logistics. More paperwork. Less lifting. "That means they trust you," I replied. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think so." Trust. It was a new language for him. Earned slowly. Revoked quickly if abused. He was learning how fragile it was. He'd stopped chasing appearances. His clothes were practical now. His social circle smaller. He didn't talk about status or money anymore. When he spoke about the future, it wasn't grand. It was cautious, grounded. "I'm thinking of taking night classes," he said once. "Project management. Nothing flashy." "That's wise," I said, and meant it. What surprised me most wasn't his progress. It was my peace. I no longer woke up bracing for chaos. No more anticipating problems I'd have to quietly fix. No more calculating how much of my life I'd need to give up to maintain someone else's illusion. My time became my own again. I took on a consulting role for a small municipality, helping them assess structural issues in older public buildings. The work was slow, thoughtful, deeply satisfying. No ego, just integrity. I also started volunteering once a week at a trade school, mentoring students who wanted to work in engineering but didn't come from privilege. Kids with callous hands and clear eyes. Kids who listened. They reminded me of someone I used to know. Elaine's world, on the other hand, continued to shrink. Through mutual acquaintances, people I trusted not to dramatize, I learned bits and pieces. Victor's consulting income never recovered. Elaine sold jewelry, then furniture, then moved from the house she'd once flaunted into a modest condo she refused to show anyone. She never apologized. Not for the dinner. Not for her silence. Not for the years she'd fueled a lie. Some people don't change. They adapt just enough to survive. One afternoon, she showed up at my door. I hadn't seen her in person in over a year. She looked older. Not gracefully, restlessly. Her hair was immaculate, but the confidence behind it had thinned. She stood stiffly, purse clutched too tight, as if afraid I might try to take it from her. "Reggie," she said, forcing a smile. "Can we talk?" I considered closing the door. Instead, I stepped aside. We sat across from each other in the living room, the space unchanged by time. The same furniture, the same light filtering through the windows. Familiar, and suddenly foreign. "I didn't come to fight," she said quickly. "I came to understand." I didn't respond. She sighed. "Caleb won't talk to me the way he talks to you. That should tell you something," I said. Her lips tightened. "You didn't have to do what you did." "I did," I replied, "because nothing else worked." "You humiliated him," she said. "You took everything." I took back what was mine. I corrected. "You and Victor enjoyed it. He learned to expect it." Her voice softened. "He's my son. He's my son, too." Silence fell. "I didn't think you had it in you," she said finally, "to go that far." "That," I said calmly, "was the problem." She looked away, eyes glistening, but not with regret, with loss, of comfort, of access. "I'm struggling," she admitted. "Victor's not what I thought he was." "I knew," I said. "You could help," she said carefully. "You always helped." I leaned forward slightly. "That man you left," I said, "doesn't exist anymore." Her breath caught. "I don't owe you rescue," I continued. "And Caleb doesn't owe you protection from consequences." Her shoulders sagged. "So that's it." "That's it," I confirmed. She stood, anger flashing briefly before resignation replaced it. "You've changed." "Yes," I said. "I have." After she left, I felt nothing. No triumph. No sorrow. Just closure. Caleb came by a week later. He noticed the quiet immediately. "She was here, wasn't she?" "Yes." He exhaled. "I figured she would try." "She did." "What did you tell her?" "The truth." He nodded. "Good." We sat on the porch together as the sun dipped low. "I didn't offend you back then," he said suddenly. "At the restaurant." I waited. "I thought silence would keep the peace," he continued. "I see now it just protected the lie." I looked at him. Not the boy-eyed rays, not the man he pretended to be, but the person he was becoming. "Peace built on silence isn't peace," I said. "It's debt." He absorbed that. "I don't expect forgiveness," he added. "I'm still working." "That's enough," I replied. We sat there as the sky darkened. He stood to leave, then paused. "I'm proud of you," he said. "For what?" "For not saving me," he answered. I watched him walk down the steps, into a life finally his own. That night, I slept deeply. The kind of sleep that comes when there's nothing left to defend. And for the first time in decades, I knew this chapter was truly closing. Not with drama, not with reconciliation, but with understanding. The quiet kind. Time doesn't heal everything, but it reveals everything. Another year passed, not marked by milestones, but by absence. No emergencies. No frantic calls. No silent expectations that I'd step in when someone else failed to plan. The silence that once felt like punishment now felt like space. Breathing room. Ownership of my own life. Caleb stayed steady. That was the biggest change. He didn't rise quickly. He didn't fall dramatically either. He learned something far harder than success. Consistency. He rented a modest apartment near the logistics yard. Nothing fancy. Second floor. No elevator. Furniture bought in pieces. Slowly. A couch from a closing sale. A table from a co-worker who was moving. He fixed a wobbling chair himself instead of replacing it. That alone told me more than any apology ever could. He paid rent on time. Paid his own bills. Missed a few social events because he had an early shift. The kind of excuses I used to make when he was a child and I worked double days. I never pointed that out. He figured it out on his own. One evening, he showed up unexpectedly with a folder under his arm. I got accepted, he said, setting it on the table, for night certification, operations management. Starts next month. I opened the folder. Tuition plan, payment schedule, all in his name. No help. I asked carefully. He shook his head. No, I want to know I earned it. That was the moment I knew the lesson had stuck. Elaine disappeared from our orbit almost completely. I heard she'd taken a position managing a small boutique, part-time. Victor was gone from the picture. Whether he left her or she left him didn't matter. Their relationship had been built on appearances, and once the lights went out, there was nothing holding together. She tried once more, sent a carefully worded email. Polite, neutral, almost professional. I didn't reply. Not out of spite, out of clarity. Some doors closed because they should never reopen. Meanwhile, my life expanded quietly. I finished the community library design and watched it break ground. I attended the ceremony anonymously, standing at the back as officials praised the vision. I didn't need my name spoken. I knew the math was right. The structure would last. That was enough. I traveled more, nothing extravagant. Small towns, national parks, places where people didn't ask what you did, only where you were from. I slept well, ate simply, read deeply. I began writing notes, not a memoir, not advice, just reflections. Lessons I wished I'd understood earlier. Things like, providing isn't parenting if it replaces teaching. Silence can be strength, but only if it's chosen. Rescuing someone from consequences robs them of growth. One afternoon, I receive a call from an unfamiliar number. Mr. Covington, a young voice asked. This is Leah from the trade school. We wanted to ask if you consider mentoring a new intake group next semester. I already mentor, I said. Yes, she replied quickly. But these students are different. Older, people restarting. Some of them lost everything. They could really use someone who understands that. I thought about Caleb, about the restaurant, about the word loser spoken too easily. I'll do it, I said. The group met twice a week. Men and women in their 30s, 40s, 50s, former managers, former tradespeople, some broken by illness, others by bad choices, a few by entitlement. I didn't lecture. I listened. When they asked how I'd built my career, I told them the truth. I learned how things fail before I learned how they succeed. I said, that resonated. One evening after class, a man lingered behind. Mid-40s, worn hands, nervous energy. Sir, he said, can I ask you something personal? You can ask, I replied. I may not answer. He swallowed. How did you let go of your kid? I studied him. I didn't, I said. I let go of control. He nodded slowly. That sounds harder. It is, I said, but it's the only way they grow. Caleb came to one of the sessions later that year, sat quietly in the back, unannounced. He didn't interrupt, just observed. Afterward, he said, you sound different when you talk to them. How so? Stronger, he said. Not louder, just certain. That's because I'm not asking to be heard anymore, I replied. He smiled. Yeah, I get that now. A few months later, he invited me to dinner, not a restaurant, his place. He cooked, burned the first batch of chicken, laughed about it, didn't panic, didn't apologize excessively. We ate at his small table. 2 plates, no performance. I used to think power was about being admired, he said suddenly. Now I think it's about not needing approval. I raised an eyebrow. That realization took me 70 years. Guess I caught up, he said. You're ahead. I corrected. You learned it before it cost you everything permanently. He hesitated. I don't expect us to be what we were. We can't, I said gently. That version depended on imbalance. What can we be? I considered. 2 men. Related. Honest. Separate. He nodded. I can live with that. So could I. Later that night, After he left, I sat alone with the quiet. I thought about the restaurant again, not with anger, but with distance. Like, remembering a storm you survived. I realized something important. If he hadn't stood up and said those words, I might still be paying for a life that wasn't mine. Still mistaking endurance for love. Still shrinking. Pain doesn't excuse cruelty, but sometimes cruelty triggers truth. I didn't forgive the insult. I outgrew it. The final test came unexpectedly. A call from a hospital. Elaine. She'd fallen. Broken hip. Surgery needed. Recovery would be slow. They listed you as emergency contact, the nurse said. I closed my eyes. Is she stable? I asked. Yes. Then remove my name. I said calmly. Contact her son. There was a pause. Very well, sir. I hung up and felt steady. Caleb called me later that evening. I heard about Mom, he said. Yes. She asked if you'd come. I won't, I replied. I understand, he said quickly. I just wanted you to know I'll handle it. I know you will, I said. And he did. He visited her. Coordinated care. Stayed professional. Kind but firm. He didn't ask me for money. Didn't ask me to intervene. That was the final confirmation. He had become someone who could carry weight without passing it on. Weeks later, Elaine sent a message, not asking for help. Just one line. I see now that silence was your boundary, not your weakness. I didn't reply. Not because she didn't deserve closure, but because I didn't need to give it. Some realizations arrived too late to change outcomes. They only change understanding. As winter approached, I returned to my porch one evening, wrapped in a thick sweater, watching leaves fall. Caleb had texted earlier, passed my first certification. Thank you for not stepping in. I typed back, proud of you. That was it. No long speech. No reclaiming history. Just truth, spoken quietly. I leaned back, listening to the wind move through the trees. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was earned. The year turned without ceremony. No fireworks. No countdowns. Just another quiet morning where the sun came up exactly as it always had. Steady, reliable, unconcerned with who had fallen or risen the year before. I woke early, as I always did now. Habit stays even when purpose changes. I brewed my coffee slowly, standing by the kitchen window as steam curled upward, catching the light. Outside, frost traced thin white veins across the lawn. Winter had settled in, calm and unapologetic. For the first time in decades, my days belonged to no one but me. That realization still startled me sometimes. Not with fear, but with a strange, gentle awe. I no longer checked my phone first thing in the morning. No waiting for requests disguised as conversations. No bracing myself for disappointment. If the phone rang, it rang. If it didn't, the silence was not an accusation. It was peace. Caleb called once a week now. Sometimes twice. Not to ask, just to tell me things. He told me about work. About a supervisor who pushed too hard. About a co-worker who reminded him of who he used to be. About small victories. Solving a routing issue. Being trusted with responsibility that wasn't flashy but mattered. He never mentioned money. That was how I knew everything had truly changed. One evening, months after the hospital call, he asked if I'd walk with him. We met at a riverside trail halfway between our homes. The path was narrow and quiet, the water running low and dark beside us. No audience, no tension. I used to think you walked away to punish me, he said, hands shoved into his jacket pockets. I didn't, I replied. I know that now, he said, but I needed time to understand why it hurt so much. I waited. It hurt because it exposed something I didn't want to see, he continued. I didn't respect you because I didn't respect myself. I needed you to be smaller so I could feel bigger. I stopped walking and looked at him. That awareness, I said carefully, is the hardest thing a person can earn. He nodded. I wish I'd earned it sooner. So do I said, but wishing doesn't build anything. He smiled faintly. No, it doesn't. We stood there a moment, the river murmuring beside us. I don't expect forgiveness, he said quietly. I don't think I deserve it. I didn't offer punishment, I replied. So forgiveness isn't the point. Then what is? Growth, I said, and distance when it's necessary. He exhaled slowly, like someone setting down a weight they've been carrying too long. I can live with that, he said. So can I. That night, I wrote the final note in my journal. Not about him. About me. I wrote about the man I'd been. The one who mistook endurance for virtue. The one who believed silence was safer than truth. The one who thought love meant limitless access. I wrote about what it cost me. And what it gave me back when I stopped. I didn't burn the journal. I didn't hide it. I placed it on the shelf beside the blueprints and books that had defined my professional life. It belonged there. Because it was also a structure, built carefully, honestly, with load-bearing truths. Spring arrived slowly. The mentoring group grew. New faces joined. Some left. Others stayed. One man landed a job after 20 years of drifting. A woman in her 50s started her own small repair business. Another simply learned how to stand still without panic. They thanked me. I told them the truth. I didn't teach you, I said. I just stopped protecting you from gravity. They laughed, but they understood. One afternoon, I received a letter in the mail. Handwritten. Elaine. I considered not opening it. Then I did. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a plea. It was an acknowledgement. She wrote about how losing everything had forced her to confront the emptiness she'd mistaken for success. How quiet terrified her now, because it left her alone with herself. How she finally understood that comfort built on dependency was never real security. At the end, she wrote, I don't ask to be let back in. I only wanted you to know, I finally see the man I dismissed. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer. Seeing is not the same as changing. But it was enough to let the past settle. Months later, Caleb invited me to a small ceremony. Not a wedding, not a promotion party, a lease signing. He'd saved enough to rent a modest duplex. Nothing impressive, but it was his. I didn't want to do this without you knowing, he said. I shook his hand. Not hugged. Shook. That mattered. On the drive home, I thought about how strange life is, how it strips you down at the moment you think you're finished, only to give you something simpler and stronger in return. I thought about that restaurant, the words spoken, the silence that followed, and I realized something I hadn't fully understood until then. Walking away wasn't the most powerful thing I did. Refusing to come back unchanged was. I never returned to the role they expected. I built a new one. Years passed quietly. No headlines. No dramatic reunions. Just steady living. I aged. Slowly. Honestly. My hands stiffened a bit. My steps shortened. But my spine stayed straight. When people asked me what happened to my family, I answered plainly. We grew up, I said. They never asked more. One evening, as summer faded again, I sat on the porch watching fireflies rise from the grass. Caleb called. I got promoted, he said. I know, I replied. You do. Your voice changed, I said. That's how I knew. He laughed. I want to say thank you, he said, for not saving me. That was the hardest gift I ever gave, I said, and the one I needed most. After we hung up, I stayed there, listening to the night. No regret, no triumph, just alignment. I had not destroyed my son. I had dismantled a lie. And in doing so, I finally built something that would last. My life. If my story meant something to you, if you've ever been mistaken as weak because you chose patience or taken for granted because you gave without limits, stay with this channel. Share where you're watching from and keep these stories moving forward. Some lessons arrive late, but they still matter when they arrive at all.